all of these students who attend our summer research program, which is for 3 weeks over the summer in Boston. They are all, talented, interested, passionate kids in their various STEM fields, and we accept students who, maybe don't have any computer science background, or maybe have been doing computer science for 10 years and are crazy about it. And so we have a wide range of kids who are all highly intelligent, highly passionate students, and they do a massively wide variety of projects that you can check out. All of the projects on our website that I'll put in the chat in just a second. And students come from all around the world, do this huge variety of projects under the supervision of kind of an expert mentor, and we hope have a really good time. And then at the end of the program, the successful students get to join us for things like the Wolfram Emerging Leaders Program, which is a semester-long research project that they do remotely in the fall. So many of these students are currently doing that right now. And we really love having them involved for as long as we can. We've created a nice little ecosystem for them. So we're going to get started listening to a few of these talks. The way that this is going to go is these kids will come up and do their talk, be able to share their screen. You might have to bear with us for a second as we get tech sorted, but we'll get there. It shouldn't be too hard. We have about 7 or 8 kids who are going to present today with their projects that are widely varied in a lot of different areas, and they're going to present for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A after each individual student. So please put questions in the Q&A pane to your right. We would love to see those, and hopefully we can be as interactive as we can. Okay, so our first presenter is going to be Abby. So Abby, if you want to click that raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, and then Brandon should be able to give you host powers. There we go. And now you should be able to turn on your microphone and your camera and start sharing your screen. Okay, Abby, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So today, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for coming out here presenting. It's such a big honor as a high school student to be able to be part over here. And today I'm going to be talking about flight path optimizations for wind and how we can use Wolfram to essentially work with this. So a bit about myself. I'm a 9th grade student. I have a deep passion for aerospace and aeronautics. I do a lot of research, and I've had the privilege of being recognized for my projects by Lockheed Martin, MIT, and other prestigious organizations. In terms of presenting, I've done IEEE, Florida State Science Fair, and now Wolfram. And outside of academics, I'm a huge flag football fan, and I play the drums. So thank you for letting me share a bit about myself, and my LinkedIn can be scanned by the QR code. Okay, so first of all, why wind, right? So wind is caused by the sun unevenly heating the Earth's surface. These different areas will absorb heat at different rates. Warmer air will thus have a lower pressure, and cold air is going to have a higher pressure. The wind is essentially the movement from this high pressure areas to low pressure areas as it tries to equalize that. These pressure differences in terms of like flight can cause headwinds, tailwinds, and lifting of the plane's winds. On your end, you'd feel a lot of turbulence on the plane. And so by using Wolfram's wind vector data, and this is a library that incorporates live data from all across the world with global wind sources, we can use this wind data and various physics functions to create the best flight path. Okay, so when we're visualizing the data, so first of all, when we can type in wind vector data function, we can get the coordinates and the wind in miles per hour in that area right there. We can also use an airport location, and we can use direct latitude and longitude, which is incredibly helpful for like more precise measurements. And we can map this, and this is good for visualizing it, by using the Wolfram geographics and geopath data. So next we want to create, from these two locations, we want to create like a map, and we want to have all of these points across it. And so using like a random point generator, we can increase the resolution to make a very precise point map over this too. And so we will have the latitude and the longitude, and then using these points, we'll put them across the map and then show them on it. And so this is a really good visualization of how the flight paths can be chosen and which ones are best for that. Okay, so some math functions. If you need a quick refresher, a vector is an object that has both magnitude and direction. In terms of flight, the average vector is the vector that represents like the central tendency, or almost like it's the middle point of the group of arrows and how they're all going to tend to go. And so this is really useful because instead of having like a bunch of points that just like individually change throughout the flight path, we can have one big centralized thing. And so we can be able to make a very efficient algorithm that'll be able to go based on the best for that time. And it'll overall influence like fuel it'll be able to have smoother flights, reduce fuel consumption, and optimize flight travel time. And you can see on the left, we have a little bit of a picture over there of what it looks. And I'm displaying a lot of code, so if you guys want to check that out, like Rory said before, it's on the community page. Okay, so this is a really simplified thing of the math functions that I had to do here, but the magnitude is the strength of an object. And so in this case, it'll take the parallel. It's going to take the parallel of the wind that's like to the flight itself, and it's going to remove anything else there. And with that, I do want to know, like a quick caveat, is that we are not including a lot of factors. For one, simplicity, and two, we want to make this really efficient at the time. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. But we're going to use the magnitude and the direct parallel thing to see how the wind is affecting the plane in that direct movement. And a brief summary of the other mathematics functions. I use a lot of other functions to kind of emulate the formula shown below and make that into one big computational function. So, So this leads us to the best path. And so using these functions, we can use this function to make a bunch of randomly generated paths. And that's where the random point generation comes in, as you saw before. Using these points, we're going to create a very curved path. And so we're going to then have a bunch of paths. We're going to see how long it takes using the function. And then the B-spline function, as shown on the top left image, is the flight path over a map. And so graphing that, you can kind of see on the right, like a visual representation of that. And so the one in blue is actually the best flight path. And you can see the function over there uses a lot of Wolfram standardized things. It's a very heavily based mathematics project. Okay, so why is this important, right? Why do we need this in the real world? So first of all, we need this. It's good for simplifying our things. And so a lot of times when we're going into like a new field with a lot of flight optimizations, yes, we do have the technology for this. However, with simplification, we can put into a completely new language and learn new concepts with this. And we can really understand how mathematics and visualization is integrated and to create these amazing things. In terms of flight benefits, like I said before, we can reduce our fuel consumption. It'll boost overall experience. In your case, you won't feel any turbulence when you're flying. And it'll provide real-time insight on optimizing flight paths and how to go a lot faster. In the future, I do plan to incorporate more factors, such as multiple flight paths, like, with a bunch of other planes, because it's not just one plane flying at a time, or more mathematics to make the simulation more accurate in general. Yes. And so thank you so much. With that, my community page is right here if you guys want to check that out. And I'm going to be answering the Q&A now. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. I love it. While we're seeing if anybody has a question, what was the most interesting thing that you learned during doing this project?
I think the most interesting thing I learned was how mathematics is really different in computational, because for us we can purely just like plug in numbers into a function, but for a computer we have to make the computer understand that and then visualize that. And then so I think integrating those two things together was just such an amazing thing, and it really made me enjoy the Wolfram language a lot more.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, if anybody has any questions for Abby, kind of as we keep going forward, then please feel free to put those in that Q&A pane,
Yeah, thank you so
And
much.
yeah, great. Thank you, Abby. Really appreciate it. Okay, we have Aisha next. If you want to click that raise hand button.
My name is Aisha. I recently graduated high school. I was a homeschooled student, and I was one of the students during the Wolfram Summer Research Program. And my research was based on symmetry breaking, harmonic oscillators. All right, so let's get into that. So a harmonic oscillator really describes the motion of a mass connected to a spring or any similar system. You can also think of it similar to a pendulum in the way it oscillates. If you were to grab a ball attached to a string and, let it go, it will simply oscillate like so. So now that we have that, let's go into what happens when displaced. When the oscillator is displaced, the system is governed by a restoring force that follows Hooke's law, which is F equals to negative kx, where x is the displacement from equilibrium, and the negative sign indicates that the force always acts in the direction opposite to the displacement, seeking to restore equilibrium. The equation of the motion for this system can be derived from Newton's second law, F equals to ma, where a over d squared x over dt squared is the acceleration. So substituting Hooke's law into Newton's second law gives m equals to md squared 2x over dt squared equals to negative kx. Yielding such will give you 0. For this project, I mainly based myself on these two equations here to further expand on really understanding the harmonic oscillator. So I used the Hamiltonian, which is p squared over 2m plus 1/2 kx squared, and the Poisson brackets here, which further expand on the Hamiltonian. We also have simple harmonic motion where the total mechanical energy E is conserved, our kinetic energy T is 1/2 mv squared, and so forth. Symmetry in classical harmonic oscillators here are where motion is symmetric. Forces and energy distributions behave really predictably. We have a couple key symmetries here. You have time translation symmetry, where motion remains consistent over time, leading to energy conservation. Rotational symmetry, where systems retain the same properties under rotations, and restoring force symmetry. For linear oscillators, the force is proportional and symmetric with respect to displacement. If we want to break the symmetry of this oscillator, we would either have to do these three things here: damping, external driving forces, and nonlinearities. Such things will break the harmonic oscillators. So if we wanted to break the symmetry with damping, we would have to cause energy loss over periods of time, leading to decaying motion. And if we wanted to use external driving forces, we would have to cause non-uniform oscillations or resonance. Nonlinearities in restoring force can lead to inharmonic oscillations, breaking perfect symmetry. Let's move on to the quantum harmonic oscillator. We have two main types of oscillators, as known in science. We have the classical and the quantum. Now that we've learned a good amount of classical systems, let's go on to quantum systems. The quantum harmonic oscillator describes systems where a particle experiences a restoring force proportional to its displacement, but with quantized energy levels. It's governed by the Schrödinger equation as seen here, and the potential energy is 1/2 m omega squared x squared. Our energy levels are quantized, and our wave functions correspond to different quantized states. Energy levels exhibit perfect symmetry and are equally spaced, where our ground state energy, as shown in the equation there, represents 0-point energy, even at rest. Higher states, such as n equals 1, 2, 3, and it can go up to infinity, correspond to excited oscillations. So if the quantum harmonic oscillator has perfect symmetry, how can we break it? Well, first, let's continue more about certain symmetries. We have the wave function symmetry, where solutions to the Schrödinger equation for harmonic oscillators have symmetric wave functions. Knowing this, we can figure out how to break our quantum oscillator. External forces or perturbations break the system's perfect symmetry. It leads to uneven energy levels and changes the regular spacing between them. It affects the behavior, dynamics, and energy spectrum. In the real world, it affects behavior, dynamics, and energy spectrums in real systems. So, and harmonic oscillators are complex molecules. And we have energy quantization as well. Discrete energy levels reflect symmetry in the Hamiltonian. Continuing on, there are two main types of symmetry breaking that I used during my project. I used spontaneous symmetry breaking and parity symmetry. In spontaneous symmetry breaking, I use certain quantum states that break symmetry without an external influence, like ground state degeneracies. Parity symmetry, which is what I have used about later in during the project, is where wave functions are either symmetric or even or asymmetric, odd, under reflection. Because this project was really based on the math here, I had to use a lot of mathematical based functions, such as desolve, plot, manipulate, table, parametric plot, list plot, and evaluate an ND eigenvalue. The reason why I used desolve was because it solves differential equations really easily, and I did not want to spend a lot of time solving differential equations by hand, so Wolfram was super great when it comes to solving differential equations. You just plug and chug, and it solves it right there for you. Plot was especially a useful function, since if you wanted to understand what's actually going on with the math, you would obviously have to visualize it, and such plot became my favorite function of all. I also used manipulate to see what happened over time and phase space during when it came to visualizing harmonic motion and what happens when it broke its symmetry. It was an especially useful function. I used table, which generated a list of values. I used it I used it during my project for listing all of the values of the eigenvalues and eigenfunctions. I used parametric plot, which visualizes motion in phase space, and used that with manipulate so that I can interact with parameters while it visualizes motion in phase space. I used list plot and evaluate, which helps plot data points and speeds up calculations, and I used ND eigenvalue, which numerically finds eigenvalues of differential operators. ND eigenvalue was especially useful when it came to breaking the symmetry of quantum harmonic oscillators. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. You can check out my analysis in the community page, as Rory said. I'm really glad and very honored especially to be speaking in this conference. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What did you most enjoy about this project?
I really enjoyed just the overall learning more about harmonic oscillators. I remember not being interested in harmonic oscillators at all until I started to realize more and more how important the harmonic oscillator is in real life. I am pretty sure that the quantum harmonic oscillator is one of the known quantum systems that have a solution. And that was really, really interesting to learn and just really dive in deep and just think what makes this the quantum harmonic oscillator. How can I break this? What is going on here? And I really enjoyed using a lot of Wolfram's functions. I especially liked using the manipulate and plot. It was probably one of my favorite functions, to be honest.
Amazing. Lots of fun. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, Amaya, let's get you sorted out. I click that raise hand button. I'll let you in. There we go. And then you need to turn on your video and your microphone.
Hi, everyone. My name's Amaya Srinivasan, and I'm a high school junior from New Jersey. And my project is on analyzing molecular cages. So molecular cages, which are really commonly seen in biology and chemistry fields, are compounds with an internal chamber that can be used to encase other compounds. And these cages can be self-assembled or also formed through synthetic covalent bonds. and these allow for the encaged compounds to be transported without being affected by other species and solutions. So the encapsulation is based on the size, shape, and energy of guest compounds, which is the reason why studying the molecular cage's energy, shape, and size is really important to find out what compounds they can hold. So these are commonly used in medicinal fields and have been used to hold and transport medicinal drugs. So the two starting ones I'm analyzing are adamantane and twistane, which are both C10H16 molecules, which are members of the cage compounds. So as you can see here, these are the two plots of adamantane and twistane. Even though they have the same formula, they do look a little different. So that brings me to analogs. So analogs are basically, in simple terms, a substance that is similar to another. And there's many different types, such as structural, functional, and prodrug, etc. So here you can, to make it really clear to see the patterns, I have defined methylene pattern as the CH2 group. And here is a plot of the molecule adamantane with the CH2s highlighted. So the amount of CH2s between a CH3, which is in gray over here, can be considered as the bridge length of the molecule. So here, there's a bridge length of 1 in adamantane. And now to create a bridge length of 2 molecule, I can plot that here. And as you can see, there are 2 methylenes in between each of the gray CH3 groups. So, but there is a problem with this plot though, for optimizing the volume, interior volume to hold a larger compound. And it's that some of the hydrogen atoms are pointing inwards. So using invert atom, you can go point the hydrogen atom out to optimize this molecule. But that does require some sort of energy input to do so. So to create larger of cage molecules, instead of just manually drawing each molecule and plotting it, there can be a function. So single bridge test is just the pattern of a single bridge, and double bridge test is the pattern of a double bridge. And a pattern reaction can be created to go from a single bridge to a double bridge. And although pattern reaction is an unbalanced reaction in real life, if you were to take this, it's very useful to go create some of these larger molecules. And so I created from 1 to 2 all the way up to 8 to 9. And then I have this function combined transformation, which will take a starting molecule, which is usually cages of all length 1, which would be adamantane, and convert it to any sort of cage that can have a length of up to 9. So here, this is what adamantane with bridges up to length 9 look. And as you can see, it's a very big molecule, and it's not fully optimized yet, but it can still hold very big compounds. And now we can go to bridges of length 0. So something cool that I found is that some of the bridges of length 0 are actually some of the platonic solids. So adamantane and twistane here are not won't be seen as platonic solids, which is why the bridge length is 1 in some of them. But here, dodecahedron with the formula C20H20 is a platonic solid and a platonic hydrocarbon, which is why you can see that it's fully colored, because all of the carbons are technically CH3. So here, there's cubane, which is another one based off the cube, which has the formula C8H8. And something surprising here is tetrahedron, which is C4H4, has never been synthesized before. And when trying to plot it, there was many errors with like the diagram given. So the individual angles had to be modified by hand based on existing literature, because this molecule has very high angle strain. And this is what it would look like without angle strain. So after that, I found symmetries using MMFF optimization. So MMFF is Merck molecular force field, which is one of the force fields that's very useful to go analyze the forces between different atoms in a molecule. So here I have calculated the different MMFF energies for adamantane, twistane, tricyclohexadecane, and tricyclodocosane. And as seen here, it ranges from as little as 17.76 kcal per mol all the way up to 131. So here the symmetry of it can be plotted. And as you can see here, there's different values, and some very small molecules such as adamantane does have a lot of symmetry, like C3, C2, S4, and sigma. And comparing the original molecules with the ones optimized with MMFF, not all of them have the same symmetry. For example, adamantane originally had C1, but the optimized one is TD. And now to use consistent force field for optimization and calculations, as you can see, the original one has much more energy than the optimized ones. And you more likely want one with lower energy because it's much more stable. And comparing the volumes of it, the optimized ones also have a greater volume. For adamantane, it's a very small difference of 0.0002 angstroms cubed. But for tricyclodocosane, it goes all the way up to 6.5 angstroms cubed. And to generate some stable minima conformations for adamantane, you can use molecule modify and generate conformers. And as shown here, there are 25 conformers layered on top of each other. And as you can see, their arrangement is all different, which is why it looks kind of like a really uneven sphere. But this is what each of the 25 conformations looks like. And when plotting it on a histogram, you can see that it ranges from as low as from 30 to 32 all the way up to 40 to 42, just based on the conformation of the molecule. And the one with the lowest energy is this over here, this specific arrangement. And now for practical applications of molecular cages, one of them is medicinal ion and molecule transport. So here I have the convex hull mesh outlined for each of these cages. And as you can see here, it's like different shapes for each of the molecules. And the lowest one is 49.2 angstroms cubed, and it goes up to 166 angstroms cubed, which is quite big. And to go get ions and molecules to fit into these cages, there's the ion volume, which takes the specific ion and the charge and maps it to the actual size of the ion. So it creates like a sphere that's like a pretty good representation for this model. And for molecule, there was trouble like trying to get it centered into the cage. So the two functions translate to centroid 3D and translate molecules to centroid. Just take the original starting molecule and go translate it to a certain point so it's centered in the cage. And here are just some starting molecules and the updated ones that have been translated to a centroid. And resulting molecule is just the giant cage based on how big you want it to be. So here is the manipulate that's created. So here, it's just using penicillin as one of the molecules, but there are other options, and there are many ion options here as well. And from this visualization, you can see that this specific cage can fit penicillin quite tightly, but it probably wouldn't fit with a cage any smaller. So in the future, I'd like to include more molecules and also calculate the energy steps from going from a length 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc. And yeah, that's it for my presentation. Feel free to contact me. My email and LinkedIn is here. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What was the kind of biggest thing that you learned from doing this project?
So I originally didn't know that like one single molecule could have like so many conformers that have like a very big range of energy. It was really interesting to see just like moving it a little bit in the plane or like slightly changing the angle of one molecule can like almost double the energy of it and make it much less stable.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have David.
Hi everyone, I'm David Wong. I'm a student in the Wolfram Summer Research Program, and this is my project, a study on hash probing on graph. So for our table of contents, so first we're going to go over a background on what hashing and probing actually are, before diving into some hashing and probing functions that I'll use and compare and contrast during the process of this project. Then I'll go over some findings and data, and I'm going to analyze them. And then I will conclude the project. All right, so for the background of hashing. So the process of comparing two strings in programming can be very inefficient because unlike other data types, such as integers, comparing strings can be a very slow process that involves iterating through the length of the string to search for mismatches, taking linear time. This can explode as the length of the strings and the number of comparisons increase. There have been many ways to bypass this time complexity issue, and one of which is just to hash the strings. So hashing is defined as the action of mapping a set of data to fixed values. For example, when we hash a list of strings to ints, we map each string to an int. So we can compare them in linear time by simply comparing the int values instead, or compare them in constant time, sorry. So hashing is done by a hashing function, which takes a string and returns the hash value. However, with this, we run into a possible issue. What if our hash function returns the same value for two distinct strings? Then obviously the hash function wouldn't function correctly, as the comparison would falsely return that the strings are identical. We consider this a collision. However, there's a way to avoid collisions: probing. Probing is a method used to find empty positions in a hash table in the event of a collision and assign the value to a new empty position. So now we go over some hashing functions that are used during the process of this project. So our first function, kind of like not a realistically viable function, more of just like a baseline comparison, is the random choice hash, which simply just picks a random integer within the range of the hash table. I'll use this as a general benchmark for comparison and use it in steps requiring a large amount of computation due to the high efficiency. I also use it to test probing algorithms, like in particular. So our second function will be the Wolfram built-in hash function, because Wolfram actually has a built-in hashing method that hashes a string to an integer. And our third function will be the polynomial rolling hash. The polynomial rolling hash is a hash function that's often used in competitive programming. It effectively chooses a prime base before converting each letter to a digit in said base and changing the number to base 10. Let's say, for example, if our string was like bad, B-A-D, and like our prime base was 29, then this would hash to 2 times 29 squared, because B is the second letter of the alphabet, plus 29 times 1 plus 4. Now we'll talk about the two different probing algorithms that we'll use, which will differ based on how we interpret our hash table. So our first algorithm will be linear probing, which is very simple. In the case of a collision, we simply just continue along the hash table until we find an empty position for placing the new string here. This can be seen in the image, like here, in which, like, see, John Smith and Sandra D hash the same value. So Sandra D gets placed in the next open slot, which happens to be just the next one on the list. Our second algorithm will be grid probing, in which we interpret the hash table as a square grid. From this, we can use a flood fill algorithm in the case of a collision to find the closest empty position in the grid by moving into adjacent cells. So what flood fill actually is that basically we simply just start from the filled cell where the collision happens, and then we can search to the right, up, left, and down in our table, and then we recursively do this until we find an empty position. So basically just like a BFS, if you know what that is. So here's our setup. So to set up my trials, I needed a way to generate a graph that can model my hash table and that had edges placed correctly in the case of like a grid probing. I did this by just creating a function that could create a torus graph, which has edges between any pair of adjacent cells with modulus. In the picture in the middle, we can see results from hashing 50 words and using grid probing on it, where highlighted edges describe the probing algorithm. And the image on the right shows the hash table in grid format. So red is where like the cells are filled. Here, the red dots are also where like the cells are filled. And the red lines are where we experienced a collision and the probing algorithm had to move in some direction to find more empty positions. This is obviously just like the torus graph by itself. So our first bit of analysis comes from analyzing the quantity of collisions that occur during probing. We run each function 100 times on a hash table of size 100 and 50 randomly chosen words from the English language, as seen in the two charts that depict the results. One of the most interesting things from the results is that the random choice actually outperforms both the other functions in terms of both average collisions and deviation. I'm not sure if there's actually like a reason for this, or if this is just because I didn't like, or there just wasn't enough data. We also did something similar with a grid, where the hash table was instead a 10 by 10 grid, and the polynomial rolling hash on average outperformed both the other functions here in terms of both deviation and mean. We also had a plot that modeled the average amount of collisions between all three functions given a list of random words that repeatedly increased in size. So we can see that all three functions here had a pretty similar curve. So now we talk about clusters. So we also did analysis on a cluster, which is defined as a group of adjacent occupied cells in the hash table. We use the same data set as we did on the last slide, except this time analyze the quantity of clusters. We define a large cluster to be a cluster that takes up over 20% of occupied cells, and a medium cluster to be a cluster that takes up over 10% of occupied cells. So as we can see here, like there's far more on average small clusters and medium clusters than large clusters. And we also have two graphs that depict the quantity of clusters as the hash table fills up. So we note that the linear graph actually ends up peaking around half full before the clusters start connecting to each other and then the overall quantity dropping. And then the grid graph peaks at around 30% full. I think like a possible explanation for why the peak for the grid graph is earlier is because overall the parameters or the amount of squares that are adjacent to each cluster in a grid graph is significantly higher than that of like the linear graph or the linear table. So this means that it's far easier to for a new word to just simply join with an old cluster instead of creating a new cluster by itself. We also did an analysis on the density of clusters as they grew in size on the grid. So we defined the density of a cluster to be the percentage of the smallest bounding rectangle that it takes up. So we note that the average density for small clusters actually ends up starting out very high. We're dropping to minimum at around 30 before linearly increasing. And the reason why this part looks linear is due to the fact that the bounding rectangle at that point is very likely to simply just encompass the entire grid and not grow in size anymore. Because like if you take like, for example, a grid with 50 filled or like with half the words filled, then it's very likely that the smallest bounding rectangle will simply just be the whole grid. So in conclusion, I think that it's very interesting that a simple idea, the idea of hashing, a basic algorithm of programming, could end up with so many different directions to explore. There are multiple different comparisons that one is able to make, whether it be between hashing functions, between dimensions, or even specific parameters of some of these functions. And this project has successfully created multiple hashing and probing functions, tested them in a variety of data sets, and compared them to classes as well. I think that this is a very interesting concept overall, and I really enjoyed making this project. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Yeah. What was the most interesting or the toughest part of this project?
I think the most interesting part of this project was probably just like seeing how the different functions would perform, because I was really like interested to see, like especially with the polynomial rolling hash, because it's very commonly used in like competitive programming, to see if it had any like noticeable advantages. I think the most difficult part of this project was actually simply just getting the data sets, because I mean, like to get accurate data, I had to run it a lot of times, but this like ended up taking actually like a significant amount of time. Like I had to leave my computer on multiple times, like overnight during the camp, in order to like get actual data sets. So that was a little frustrating, but it worked out in the end.
Yeah, amazing, great. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we're gonna do Sindora now. So if you want to turn on your jigger, perfect. You can turn on your microphone and your camera.
So I'm Sindura, and I'm from Bangalore, India, and I'll be discussing my research over the past summer on polysaccharide bonding in Cryptococcus neoformans. So Cryptococcus neoformans is a interesting pathogenic yeast that primarily affects immunocompromised individuals. And one of the yeast's key features is its complex polysaccharide capsule, which encircles the cell wall, and it plays a really important role in helping the fungus evade the host immune system. So this capsule is composed of several sugars that primarily include glucuronic acid, xylose, as well as mannose. So these saccharides are the essential building blocks of the polysaccharide capsule, and each of them contributes to unique properties to the structure. So my project primarily
involved identifying their low energy conformations and looking at how they are influenced by a change in torsion angles, and looking at the energy dynamics of the various saccharides in the polysaccharide capsule. So glucuronic acid is the first of the three sugars, and it's a derivative of glucose, specifically uronic acid, which means that it has a carboxyl group that makes it more flexible in terms of its molecular movement. So what's really interesting about glucuronic acid is that its OH functional groups can rotate around the carbon-oxygen bonds, allowing it to adopt many different conformations. So this flexibility can lead to different energy levels within the molecule, depending on how the hydroxyl groups are positioned. So to better understand this, we used something called as Merck molecular force fields, MMFF, which is quite a powerful tool for analyzing the potential energy surfaces of molecules by adjusting the torsion angles. So torsion angles are basically the angles between specific groups of atoms, and we can see how the energy changes, and then we can identify the most stable conformations for glucuronic acid. So for this study, we generated around 700 different conformers, and we used energy minimization techniques to find the lowest energy arrangement. The lowest energy state corresponds to the most stable conformations, and this is really important to look at how the sugar behaves in the environment of the capsule. And after energy optimization, the conformers were deemed to be stable and had energy levels falling in between 66 and 67 kilocalories per mole. So this energy signifies the molecule's stable conformations, with the torsion angles of its hydroxyl groups playing a really important role in really understanding and further determining its energy levels and the overall molecular structure. So these images right over here is of the lowest energy conformer of glucuronic acid, and we can also see how the torsion angles of each bond relate with the increase or decrease in energy level. And by comparing these conformational landscapes, we can really understand how these sugars assemble into a capsule that effectively protects the yeast from the host defenses. And now coming to mannose, a 6-carbon sugar. Like glucuronic acid, mannose also plays a really important role in the capsule, contributing to a diversity factor that helps the yeast defend itself against the immune system. And mannose is quite different from glucuronic acid in terms of its energy landscape. So after generating and optimizing 700 conformers again, we found that mannose's lowest energy conformer had a slightly higher energy range, around 78 to 79 kilocalories per mole. So this higher energy landscape primarily indicates that mannose may adopt a more complex set of stable conformations, allowing it to be more versatile into how it fits the capsule structure. And finally, we have xylose, which is a 5-carbon sugar that is particularly important because of its role in making the capsule more antigenic, meaning it really helps the yeast interact with the immune system. So xylose, compared to the other two sugars, exhibited the lowest minimum energy, that is around 62 to 62.5 kilocalories per mole. This means that xylose had fewer low energy conformations available, giving it a more constrained energy landscape. So this makes xylose a little bit more rigid than glucuronic acid or mannose, which is maybe significant when we talk about how the sugars come together to form the capsules. So, so the main idea here is when we are looking at senior formants, which primarily affects people with HIV or AIDS or people undergoing chemotherapy, the capsule forms one of its most effective weapons, allowing it to hide from the immune system and persist in the human body. So by really understanding the conformational preferences of these saccharides, we can try to understand how the capsule forms and functions at a molecular level. And this probably opens a new potential therapeutic approaches that could target the capsule or new, say, treatments that makes the yeast more vulnerable to the immune system. So looking forward, there are several directions we could work to improve this research. For example, we could really look at how these saccharides behave in different solvents, particularly water, since the human body is primarily an aqueous environment. So this could be done through molecular dynamics simulation to see how molecules interact with the polysaccharides. Also, we could really explore how these sugars bind to the immune system components or potential drug molecules using the low energy conformers identified in this study as a starting point. And another really interesting possibility is to apply this kind of analysis to the capsules of other pathogenic fungi to see if they maybe share similar structural features or conformational preferences. So if yes, we could be looking at a broader mechanism for how dangerous fungi defend themselves. And we could potentially enhance the accuracy of these methods using something called as DFT, or density functional theory, which can provide a larger, deeper understanding of the electronic effects of driving these conformational preferences. So at the end of it, these findings provide a molecular roadmap for developing targeted therapies against Cryptococcus neoformans that could potentially gain access to new treatments and ultimately improve lives. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. That's very, very cool. What was the most exciting thing that you found out, that you learned?
I think the most exciting part of this was really trying to simulate chemical processes on a computer, and I think that we're getting closer and closer to understanding the natural world by computational.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have our final presenter now, Shreya. If you want to click that raise hand button.
So my name is Shreya Ramanan, and I'm a current senior at the Dulles Math and Science Academy in Sugar Land, Texas. And today I'll be sharing my work on analyzing GPT-2's brain development. So to start off, the development of AI chatbots and generative pre-trained transformers, aka GPT, has grown rapidly with over 1.5 billion users around the world for one of the most popular versions of this, ChatGPT. And the increasing popularity of such technology leaves us wondering, how exactly do LLMs generate useful outputs in about half the time that it takes for a human to do the same? And so to fully understand how GPT models work, we can look into the brain of the model, specifically by altering GPT-2, a large language model produced by OpenAI that predicts the next word or phrase given either a question or the start of a sentence to analyze the level of manipulation at which the output is affected. And so this project seeks to investigate how altering specific parts of GPT-2 affects its response to understand how GPT-2 and other text generative AI models work. And this is done through altering the tokens, nodes, and temperature parameters of the LLM and studying its output. And so first, we need to set up the GPT-2 model on our computer and extract information. So over here, we start off by importing GPT-2 into the Mathematica notebook and defining it as a variable so that we can reference it later. And this allows us to see some basic information when we click that plus sign, such as how it's a neural net model with a transformer structure. And that basically means it takes significantly more time to train compared to larger LLMs. And then we move on to defining the function generate sample that allows the model to generate text and finish a sentence based on an input. And as you can see, text can now be generated by GPT-2 when the function is called, which is ultimately the basis of the model. And so the following lines of code display some information about the GPT-2 model here, like how it has 196 arrays, each containing 700 to 800 weights. But what does this actually mean? Well, layers each have a different role in the output of the LLM in terms of processing the output, training the model, and extracting information and outputting a response. And each layer has a bunch of neurons or units that process information, and the weights control the strength of the layer by determining how much influence one neuron has on another. Now, GPT-2 models generate text token by token, and tokens are integers that represent the smallest unit of text, either inputted by the user or generated by the model. And for reference, one token is around 4 characters. So we can zero out certain tokens in the GPT-2 model and analyze how doing so affects the output generated. And so with the code below, we first define our input text that the model should complete. And then we store those tokens generated by the model in a new variable called generated tokens and define the start and end tokens that we want to zero out. So position start and position end. And then the next part of the code is essentially a function that sorts through the tokens and replaces the start and final tokens defined earlier with 0. And so using that generate sample function that we created earlier, we now call the GPT-2 model to generate text after the specified tokens have been modified. So after zeroing out tokens 1 through 10, this shows its output here. And so 2 functions that we can use to analyze the outputs of GPT-2 and its coherence when altered are text structure, which locates the point when the output sentence structure begins to fail, and dictionary word queue to find when the model begins to make up nonsensical words. And so according to those functions, we can see that the GPT-2 model has difficulties placing appropriate punctuation and writing sentences when the first 10 tokens are zeroed out. And not only does the sentence structure display that the model outputs 3 different forms of punctuation, which doesn't make sense, but the sentence itself is illogical and irrelevant to the prompt that we put in. And so now what we're going to do is repeat that same process with different parts of the model, like tokens 50 through 60 here. And the sentence generated when later tokens are zeroed out shows several drastic differences from the previous output. And all of the words that the model produced can be found in the English dictionary, and the analysis of the sentence grammatical structure proves that the model produced a complete and relevant thought with all appropriate parts of speech. So this basically suggests that altering tokens later on in the LLM has less of an impact, as the model is still able to produce understandable human-like sentences even after tokens 50 through 60 were set to 0. Now let's take a look at the unchanged GPT-2 model's response from the section earlier to compare text structures and words between models with unchanged versus changed tokens. And so according to the output, GPT-2 only had a few minor errors regarding sentence structure, and it overall generated a grammatically correct and relevant output though. And the sentences developed are mostly relevant to the input with no actual made-up phrases. And so this further builds on the idea that altering earlier tokens of the model have the most significant impact on the behavior of the model. And from this, we're able to conclude that the GPT-2 model and possibly other GPT models produce outputs by looking at previous tokens first, meaning that the generation of tokens and the text itself essentially builds upon each other. Now for zeroing out nodes, GPT-2 models implement nodes or layers that each play a specific role in how the model behaves, and neural nets essentially process the input through all the layers of the model, and like I said before, each layer has a unique weight or parameter assigned, and these weights take the input data and generate a response, and its size correlates to how much that layer affects the output. And so in order to test the effect that changing nodes have on the output of the GPT-2 model, we can zero out all the weights within the nodes and see if the output is different from the original. So over here, what we're doing is defining a new variable called list, and it's defined as the values of all the arrays of GPT-2. and each element of the list is set to be an array of zeros with the dimensions of both the element and the zeroed out array match. And so information about the arrays is now assigned to the parameters variable, which is then used in an association called list new. And the list with altered data is assigned to a new GPT-2 model, which we define as GPT-2 model poison to reference it later, to produce an output here. And as we can see here, the response after zeroing out all the nodes is completely incoherent to the prompt given. The model outputs random characters with words spelled wrong and with 13 words in the output that cannot be found in the English dictionary. This analysis proves that compared to when we altered just the tokens earlier, changing the weights within the nodes has a much more significant impact on how the model reacts. And so the weights of the arrays are essentially the base of the LLM that greatly impact the model's comprehensibility when changed. And one can think of these nodes or arrays as parts of the human brain. And so similar to how the brain contains over 20 structures that each play a significant role in human function, GPT-2 also contains 196 nodes that affect the model's behavior. And when certain parts of that human brain are altered, the corresponding function is affected and may appear as changes in the person's senses and how they act. Likewise, GPT-2 and other LLMs have arrays that each contain a set of weights, or the parameters, and zeroing out these weights within the arrays essentially equates to turning off parts of the model's brain, resulting in a jumbled up mess of characters and random words. And so lastly, we'll be looking at temperature parameters, and the temperature of an LLM changes from 0 to 2, although for GPT-2 and ChatGPT, it's technically infinity, and affects the randomness of the model. And so higher temperatures make the model more creative and random, but lower temperatures closer to 0 make the model's output more predictable. And so temperature is already included in the generate sample function we created earlier, so the desired temperature can simply be added to the end when calling the function, as shown here. And another metric that we can look at is repetitiveness to analyze the model's intelligence for varying temperatures. And so over here with a temperature of 0, the model uses the most predictable words according to the web text dataset developed by OpenAI to train GPT-2. And after the first sentence, however, it starts to continuously repeat itself without outputting any other variations of words. And then the same is shown with temperature of 0.5 here. And then with some trial and error, I discovered that temperature of 0.8 is basically the happy medium of the GPT-2 model. And we find that temperatures near that number are ideal as the model produces the most relevant and grammatically correct outputs to the prompt. But temperatures above 0.8 produce outputs that are no longer repetitive, but are more creative, but that word choice can also become more relevant to the prompt asked. And as the temperature increases past this ideal, the model begins to grow more and more insane, as shown here. And 1.2 is basically the GPT-2 model's breaking point. And past a temperature of 1.2 up until around 2, the model will begin to react the same way. And so in this project, I studied the GPT-2 model's neural network structure, particularly analyzing the effect that modifying nodes, temperature parameters, and tokens has on the behavior of GPT-2. And one aspect of this project that I hope to expand on in the future is studying what purpose each array in the entire GPT-2 model serves, and kind of mapping that out, because my aim is to study the similarities between the human brain and the minds of LLMs. I'd also like to try zeroing out certain individual nodes, similar to turning off certain parts of the brain, which allows me to understand how certain nodes affect the overall behavior of the function and truly discover what each node does. And so I'd like to thank CJ Applebaum, my mentor throughout the Wolfram Summer Research Program. And I would also like to thank Dr. Stephen Wolfram and Rory for coordinating this program and allowing me to speak today at this conference. And here are my references.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, what did you learn? What was most exciting about this thing?
I think my favorite part of the project was honestly learning about the different components of GPT-2 and AI, since a lot of people today use ChatGPT and other forms of AI, and it's really integrated in a lot of systems like Google or Meta. And so it's really interesting to see the behind the scenes of how it works. And I'm also really passionate about the implementation of artificial intelligence and finding intersections between neural networks and like neuroscience or the human brain. And also learning about the temperature parameters in this project was kind of an unintentional component of the project, but it turned out to be a really cool aspect of it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Great job. Okay, great. So that is it from our students. What an amazing group of kids, right? I mean, it's so cool to see the variety of stuff that these students get up to. The age range today was kind of 13 to 17, and they do some amazing things. So before we kind of head out, let me talk just a little bit about the high school summer research program, which is an amazing opportunity for students and for grown-ups. So during the program, which is 3 weeks long, this year we're doing last week of June, first 2 weeks of July, in just outside of Boston, and students throughout the program, they learn Wolfram language through a whole range of really active learning opportunities. So they do a lot of mini projects and stuff like that, and then we help them find a project that is really suitable for them. So we work. So Stephen Wolfram, myself, and the other directors of the program, we work really hard to find an individual project that will suit each student, and we'll find something that will be kind of appropriately challenging for them in an area that they're really interested in. So they get to learn a bunch about something that they're really excited about, and they also get to learn a bunch of computer stuff and coding. And then by the end of the 3 weeks, they have been supported by a mentor into writing a computational essay, which they publish on the Wolfram community. And they learn just an insane amount. We get a lot of feedback that says that they learn more in 3 weeks with us than they did, the whole school year before, which is very, very nice for us to hear. Also, throughout the program, we have a bunch of, we have guest speaker talks, we have our mentors give talks, our teaching assistants who are alumni from the summer program give talks and tell kids about really interesting stuff that they're doing. And the students get the opportunity to get involved in a lot of social activities and creative stuff. We run writing and dance and art and sport. So it's a really fun experience. So if you have a kid or somebody who might be interested in attending the program, applications will be open on the 1st of November. And we would love to see people's students attend that. That would be fantastic. And if you are a grown-up or an undergraduate student who has some good Wolfram language skills and also an interest in any area of STEM, whether that's computational linguistics or chemistry or drug development or physics or math or history, computational history, we would love to hear from you. If you would like to come and be a mentor at our program, and the mentors really make the program work. So at 12 o'clock CT, so in about 50 minutes, we'll be in the exhibit hall, and we would love to talk to anybody about that. We're the pre-college education programs team, and we would love to hear from any people who might have students that might like to come or who might enjoy being a mentor. We'd love for you to come and talk to us. Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much to all the students today. And we've really enjoyed listening to everybody's talks. And thank you so much for attending, and we really appreciate all of your time. And we will end this here. Thank you.